Thank you all for joining. Awesome. I'd like to also thank Steve for making this cool image for me. He kind of, there's a lot of different stories and different ideas about transcommunication out there, and I thought it would be good to explore a little deeper into some of the phenomenon, some of the different things that go on with it. So I, like Raphael, I also like to define things. So the first thing I have here is a definition of transcommunication. So everyone knows what communication is. It's talking to each other in different ways. Even body language could be a form of communication. But the word trans, it's a prefix that means across or through, over, beyond, on the other side of. And you can think of, words like transfusion, you see, taking blood from one person and donating it to another one, or like a transaction. Let's say you have something I want and I pay you, and then we do an exchange. So that's where the word trans comes from, and that's where the word transcommunication comes from. I also wanted to differentiate between just general communication with spirits and also specifically transcommunication. So communication with spirits, it's been something that we've actually been doing for a very long time, and Kardec has gone into this in detail as well, with the knocking on the tables, the use of different objects to interact with spirits, even lights flickering on and off could be another way to communicate. Generally, you would say, in the instance of a light flickering or a knocking on the table, you would say, knock once for yes or knock two for no, something like that. Or if the lights are flickering on, you could say flicker it, turn the light off once or turn it off twice, and then you would get a yes or a no response to your questions. And the use of different objects, a lot of us are familiar with, like a Ouija board, something like that. This started a long time ago, and it was actually a very effective way to communicate with spirits, because you had all of the alphabet already spelled out in numbers there. So instead of waiting for a number to be knocked out or a light to say yes or no to a certain letter, by using a tool like a Ouija board, or baquet, they used to call it back in Kardec's time, you could immediately ask a question and then the answer would get spelled out for you. And I actually didn't think about this today, but about the lights flickering on and off. I visited Savannah, Georgia with my family several years ago, and Savannah, Georgia is actually kind of famous for its ghost stories, and it's rich history. And my family and I, we went on this ghost tour, and we went to this kind of like this bar restaurant, and the person who was kind of giving the tour, she mentioned that there was a lot of history in this particular place, and that people had reported like different noises and sounds and voices inside of the building. And what she did was she had this flashlight, and it had like a battery, it was a small flashlight that had like one battery inside of it, and she kind of like unscrewed it to the point where the light was like just barely on, like it was just making a connection. And she started asking questions, and we didn't really get clear responses, but after she asked each question, the light would like flicker on and off, and it was really cool. So I thought it was funny that I just thought about that today, and I didn't think about it when I was preparing the talk tonight. But yeah, it was totally, you knew that something was communicating there. I mean, there was no question about it. The tour was pretty good, but that's one way that you can communicate. But transcommunication specifically, this word was kind of coined when we started to develop new instruments, and we started to work with electricity and stuff and things like that, and we were able to start recording things. So ITC stands for instrumental transcommunication, and that could be in photos, video, recordings, and EVP stands for electronic voice phenomenon, which is one of the most common types of this phenomenon. It's very simple. You have a basic tape recorder, you go to a quiet place and you ask questions, and you don't necessarily hear responses as you're asking them, but when you go back and you listen to the recording, somehow the spirits are able to record themselves, but they're able to like interact with the actual physical tape or the physical electronics, and they're able to leave messages that way. So photography was a big thing when it was first invented, and people were very confused, and they thought it was a mistake in the film development, because sometimes they would take pictures of families or people and there would be like an extra person in the background. You know? And they wouldn't know where this person, they said, I don't know that person, like, you know, what is this? Or they would see, you know, like orbs and like, you know, other flashes of light in the pictures. So photography is a lot older than recording, so we have that evidence. And then we also have video, that can also pick up different things.
We should try those here.
No, Sue just said we should try those here. We have done some things along those lines. It kind of stopped when COVID came around, but yeah, we were kind of trying to put together a group that was investigating this type of thing, and it's still on the table. We're kind of experimenting with it again, so. It would be cool to see what that would bring, and just real quick, why do you think? I won't ask why, but I would just say that it's difficult for a spirit to just materialize themselves, like for us to see. It's a lot easier for them to find some kind of material to like interact with, like a tape recorder, or the electronics and the lights and the wiring, and to send some kind of a message that way instead of them directly communicating with us. So here's a little bit of history. An American photographer named Attila von Szalay, he actually began taking pictures, and he started seeing things in the photos that he was taking. So he started investigating this, and he started taking pictures of specific areas where people would say that they would report certain, strange occurrences. And he kept researching this, and eventually he started recording things. So he started recording on records. And he did that for about 15 years, from 1941 to 1956. And he was still taking pictures during this time, so he still knew that something was going on, but he wasn't very successful with the recording on the records. So he then switched to a reel-to-reel tape, which is the picture on the bottom there. And believe it or not, those were actually invented in the 1920s. Like I could never have imagined that those were that old, but they actually used to use like steel tape. I think it was either the Germans or the Russians who developed it first, but they actually had those types of tape recorders back in the 1920s. So he began working in 1956 with that type of recorder, and he began working with this other investigator whose name was Raymond Bayless. So they were a lot more successful using this technique than he was using the records. Now Raymond Bayless, he continued to study this phenomenon, and he later co-authored a book called Phone Calls from the Dead. And I'm going to go over a little bit more from that later. And I forgot something. I had some other notes and I didn't bring them. So a little bit more on this later. And this one is more well known for the beginning of this type of phenomenon. It's this gentleman named Fredrik Jorgensen. He was a Swedish painter and a film producer, and he was recording bird songs in 1959. So what happened was he had his recordings, and he went back and when he went back to listen to them, he heard his father's voice on the recordings. And then I believe later in that same recording, he heard his wife on the recording as well, who had passed away. Now, of course, for a person to come forward and kind of explain these things, it's a little bit strange, but he continued doing this, and he also eventually received a message from his mother on the recordings as well. So that was in 1959, and that was when this kind of phenomenon kind of started to take off. So it's funny because even though a lot of people don't really say they believe in this type of things, they say they don't believe in EVP recordings, and they say that the noises on them are just noises and not people talking, and they don't believe in ghosts. They're actually, a lot of people are still really, really intrigued by this kind of phenomenon. There's been movies made about it. There's been, books and different things written about it. I don't know if anybody knows of this movie, but there was a movie, I think it was released in 2005 called White Noise with Michael Keaton. And in the movie, his wife had passed away, and somebody introduced him to the whole EVP recording phenomenon, and he started working on it himself, and he was trying to contact his wife or communicate with his wife who had passed away, and he didn't really know the circumstances of her death, so he was trying to communicate with her in the movie. So the movie, even though it's very interesting, it didn't really do very well, and then it's kind of like a horror film too, because they have to make it kind of exciting, for the audience. But yeah, it's people are very intrigued by this type of thing, even though they don't necessarily believe in it. So I also want to talk about reincarnation, because it's also interesting that a lot of people, even though they say they don't believe in spirits, or even in religion per se, they do believe in reincarnation. I've talked to a lot of people who they're not necessarily religious or believe in ghosts or that type of thing, but they do believe in reincarnation. And I find it interesting because while they believe in reincarnation and they say it makes sense to them, they don't really think about what happens to them when they die, when they disincarnate, right? But if you think about it, where do you go when you disincarnate? If you think about reincarnation, you have to go somewhere, right? Where are these people? Where are these spirits? What are they doing when you pass away? And when I talk to some of my friends who don't necessarily believe in the spiritual world and in spirits, I kind of explain it in the way that, these are people who are just like us when they disincarnate. They have the same thoughts as we do. They're still, attached to things on the earth. They still, have regrets. Right? When we hear stories about people who are on their deathbeds, they don't talk about how much money they have or how much, what kind of car they drove. They always talk about their regrets, right? They always talk about their family who they miss. So this is the first thing that we think about when we cross over to the other side. We visit those people who are our family. Right? We think about those people. I mean, a lot of people do. We think about, those regrets that we have. A lot of people they haven't talked to there are a lot of parents who haven't talked to their children for a long time. You hear these crazy stories about a mom or a dad who hasn't talked to their kid for like 10 years, and then they're on their deathbed and they say, I wish I would have made that phone call. I wish I would have contacted, my son or my daughter before I passed away. And this is what happens when we cross over to the other side, is that we go visit these people. So when we talk about transcommunication and we say, okay, so what exactly is going on here? We have to ask the questions, why are they trying to communicate and what are they trying to communicate? They're trying to communicate those things. They're trying to communicate the people who they miss. They're trying to communicate the things that they miss. And that's that's one thing to, when you work with transcommunication, that's one thing to remember. It's that this is what they're trying to, a lot of times this is what they're trying to communicate. They have regrets, they have sadness, they have issues that they still haven't resolved, and sometimes they reach out and we are able to help them. So I mentioned before that Raymond Bayless was working with that gentleman who was doing the recordings, and he came across this phenomenon that people kept telling him about, and it was that they were receiving what was called phantom phone calls, or phone calls from the deceased. And so he ended up writing a book about it. And it's a strange phenomenon, but there are a lot of stories about people who have recently passed away, and they try to contact their family members. So there was one story that there's a few stories that I brought. They weren't necessarily from this book, and I don't have the dates, but one story was there was two brothers. One named they were named Jeremy and Matt, and Jeremy had a best friend whose name was Joe, and he had passed away 2 weeks before, right? So Joe was Jeremy's best friend. So Matt, Jeremy's brother, receives a phone call on his phone. And the person on the other line sounded exactly like Joe, who was the person who had passed away 2 weeks before. And then he answers the phone and it says, "Hey, hi, it's Joe. Is Jeremy home?" And then the guy receiving the call, he was so shocked, but he still answered. He said, "No, he's not." And then the line cut off. He checked the phone and it had no caller ID, and he tried to start 69ing it, but it was not a line that was in use. But he was so freaked out about it that even to this day, he still gets chills about it. There was another story, and it's titled, Was It Brother? So it was a woman was at home. I'm sorry, it was a guy. The woman was the one who was telling the story. So her husband was, it was both at night, and it was 1:57 a.m. in the morning. The phone rings, and the phone is right next to the bed. And the woman who was telling the story said every single time the phone rings, she always wakes up, because the phone is right next to her bed. This time she didn't wake up. It was 1:57. The husband woke up. He answered the phone, and there was no answer. All he heard was beeps on the other line. Checked the caller ID. There was nothing on the caller ID. Tried to call back. Said this line was not in service. 2 hours later, his mom receives a phone call, and the mom lives about an hour away. Same exact thing happens to her. The phone rings. Somebody else was in the house, did not hear the phone ring at that time. Same thing happens. Hears bleeps, no caller ID on the phone, and tried to call back. No, the line is not in service. Come to find out that the man who had received the call, his brother had died about 6 months earlier, and they just figured that it was him, because also in the story, the mother said that she saw a figure standing at the foot of her bed, and then when she woke up, the figure had walked away. There was another interesting one where there was a man who his grandfather had passed away a while before, and when him and his wife had got home one day, there was a call on the caller ID, and it was but it wasn't as if they had received the call, it was as if they had made the call, and on the caller ID it was the grandfather's phone number. So, but they weren't home when it happened. And the interesting thing is that a couple days later, he was at work around his coworkers, and they all heard the phone ring. And then he went to answer the phone, and it was just a dial tone. And then on the phone, that particular phone, there was no caller ID. But when he checked the directory to see the outgoing calls that were made from that place, the grandfather's number was showing up on the caller ID as if they had called the number. So those were just those were just some really crazy stories. Another thing I wanted to talk about was a part of the reason why these people reach out and they try to communicate in this way is because they get stuck in whatever situation they found themselves in whenever they passed away. Not everyone has a peaceful death. Some people die violently. Some people die, suddenly, and some people, unfortunately, they get murdered, or something other things horrible happen to them. And what happens is whenever you experience something like this, it's very hard for you to move on from that type of trauma. And a lot of these spirits, when they communicate, they're just stuck in that same situation. They say, things like, "Oh, I can't move on," and I want to get my revenge. And this is another reason why these types of phenomenon occur, and this is another reason why these spirits reach out and try to communicate with us. So, man, I can't believe I forgot my notes, because I had some really cool stuff here. But so one way that we can communicate is with spirit boxes, or with these radio like sweepers. And what I was going to do, I actually had a bunch of so you can buy these online. There aren't that many. This one that I'm showing here is probably one of the most popular ones. But I had these reviews that I was going to read from like Amazon's website, and they were all like really cool. So I'll try to remember. I don't know if she's going to try and pull it up, but I'll try to remember what some of the reviews were. All right, Steve's gonna hook it up. That's not the one, but we can try it out and see what it says. So here's the first one. This thing is freakishly interesting. We've got results to prove it. We do paranormal investigations all over Florida. I have to admit, I am the skeptic of the group. We invited another investigator along for this gig at a particularly interesting location, and he wanted to test his SB11. What the heck, I thought. We did our normal thing and found what some might call an indication of paranormal activity. Steve turned his SB11 on and began to ask rudimentary questions. I have to admit, some of the responses were hard to understand and subject to questionable interpretation. However, a few were uncannily accurate, as depicted in my video. There's something going on in this place, and we're doing some more research to find out what it is. In the meantime, I picked up my own SB11, and I'll be headed to Key West for another investigation in a few weeks. I'm gonna go ahead and just read off some of the ones I have off the top of my head. Steve.
Do you want to look it? If you find it?
Oh, actually, that's a good idea.
I found a bunch of them, but there is no.
Oh, thank you so much.
Spooky radio.
I don't know if I searched the right thing. I mean, I just copied the PSB11 was whatever.
So I think this was one of them. Okay, here was an interesting one. So this review only got 2 stars, but it was actually like one of the cooler ones. The person was complaining about that the box came inside of another box, and the box on the inside was opened. So that was her complaint. But this is what she said. She said, "I put fresh batteries in, and it immediately drained them. Maybe that's the ghost around me doing that. I have a problem with one who likes to be annoying. Anyways, first thing that happened after the battery drain was the speaker kept going low and then high and then back to low. Even with an external mic, I was either not hearing what was being said or I was being blasted out of my room. The indicator light just fell off and rolled away. Then it was the volume again or the speed." There was another one where this gentleman said that he does, every weekend he goes out with his 3 daughters to go do some ghost hunting, and he has one of these spirit boxes. And then he said that he and one of his daughters were an empath, and they have great communication. And they said when they started using the spirit box with his 3 daughters, they said they got a bunch of responses, a bunch of their questions got answered, and they said the answers were way too intelligent for the thing to be a dud. They were getting solid responses.
You were talking about the calls from the death. Did you saw what happened with the building that collapsed in Miami on Channel 10?
Yeah, I didn't want to talk about that unless you wanted to use it in the future.
No, you can talk
Okay.
about it.
Okay.
No, I don't mind. You can talk on the subject.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I put the video there. I don't know if Steven can play. If you want to play the video, if you want to show the video. It's the interview from the Channel 10. The guy is receiving the call from his grandfather that is under the building. It's unbelievable, the situation.
Okay.
So asking him if you want it, okay? I don't want to.
No, it's okay. Yeah, so I'll just go over the story real quick. So the tragic thing that happened in Miami and the Surfside building that collapsed, there were I believe over 100 people who were never found. Apparently, what was it, a week after, or was it a few days after?
A few days after.
Okay, so about
maybe a week, no more than that.
So there was one family who it was 1 or 2 days after the accident happened. They received a phone call from the people who were one of the people who was never found, and I guess they reported it to the news, and that's how we heard about it. But yeah, it was. If you think about it, there's no. It was from the landline. It wasn't from a cell phone. It was from the landline. So it was from the landline of the apartment that the people were not there anymore. The unit wasn't even there anymore. They were trying to contact their family members afterward. It's a very interesting thing, and I can go over a lot of other example. No, I don't have an example, unfortunately. I did have some, just forgot them. But I'm trying to remember some other ones. But this one is one of the scanners here. This is another one. This one's called the S-Box Ghost Scanner. There aren't that many of these out there, and honestly, even myself, even though I believe these things to work, I would be skeptical in buying certain ones. This one does seem like it was the best one, and there's another one here that I was going to talk about also, which is pretty popular. But this one is the earlier version of this one here. Yeah, some of the other comments that talked about these spirit boxes was someone said, works great, works amazing. I'm getting clear responses every single time. I remembered another one. There was a person who said that their vase was knocked over in their house. And so they immediately got their device and started asking questions. And the person said that they got responses right away, intelligent responses right away. I believe the same person said that his neighbors had passed away, and he asked questions. He was asking questions, and he said the neighbor popped in and answered some questions and then left. There was another one that I remember now too. So this one here, it actually comes with a temperature gauge. So you could point it to certain parts of an area you want to, investigate, and it will tell you the temperature of it. So this person was saying that they would put it into a part of the room that was away from people, and the same spirit would leave and come back over and over again, and then sometimes it would respond to some of the questions that they were asking. So this is something that unfortunately, when we try to like quantify this type of thing, or try to find evidence for it, and when we try to ground it in science, it's something very difficult, because science is based on the replication of results. And if you can't replicate results, then it's very hard to prove something. That's why a lot of people say that this type of thing, this type of phenomenon isn't real, and because when they try to replicate the same experiments, they can't get the same results. One of the reasons for that is because sometimes it depends on who is the one doing the work, who is the one asking the questions. They say that people who are mediums or have a lot of fluids, they usually get better results with this type of thing. The spirits are more inclined to work with them and get responses. But you don't have to be a medium, and supposedly everyone is a medium in their own way. So maybe not the best medium for this type of phenomenon, but it's still something that a lot of people could try to do. And it's possible that a lot of the ones that we talked about before, the ones who had a lot of success with recording voices, maybe they were mediums, or maybe they had a lot of fluids that the spirits could use to send messages. Interestingly, in the 1800s, Thomas Jefferson was asked about this type of phenomenon, and Thomas Edison, the famous inventor. And I didn't go too much into research on this, because there wasn't a lot of it available. But someone had asked him, because in that time, around the late 1800s and 1900s, there was a lot of these types of things occurring. People were doing, seances. They were doing the turning tables, where the tables would move and dance. People would also say that they would hear voices and things like that. So someone asked Thomas Edison if it was possible to construct some kind of a device where they could communicate with the spirits. I mean, it was a totally valid question to ask at the time, because this was so prevalent. These types of phenomenon was so prevalent that it wasn't a joke to ask a question like this. And it was reported that Thomas Edison didn't shy away from the question, but he said that constructing some kind of a device that was sensitive enough to communicate could be possible, because since spirits communicated very subtly, using tables for them to communicate probably wasn't the best way for them to send messages. He said if you could construct some kind of a device that was very sensitive, that you might be successful in achieving those types of results. There's no evidence that he actually made any kind of device like this, but he definitely thought about it, and he gave a thoughtful response to it. There's another reason why a lot of scientists say that that these types of things aren't true, and that's because of this phenomenon called Peridolia. And what that is it's seeing familiar objects or patterns in otherwise random or unrelated objects. So we, organisms, and humans especially, we are very good at noticing patterns. And this is part of what constitutes our memory. If we had to relearn things every single day, it would be very difficult for us to survive. This is how you have like a mouse in like a maze, and they memorize it, and then they can go the next day and they memorize it. It's because we're very good at recognizing patterns and memorizing them. So they say that when you listen to random recordings, they say that the human mind interprets that in a way where we fill in the gaps and we say, I'm hearing something, because we're always looking for patterns, and we're always looking for things to make sense. So and it does happen. We do this a lot. We sometimes try to make sense of things that don't make sense. We sometimes see things that aren't necessarily there. We sometimes see patterns in things and images and that aren't actually there. So it is something that is scientifically proven, but they use that to kind of say that this whole phenomenon is not true. And the final thing that I'm going to talk about here, I got it from the Spirits book, and it was about self-preservation. I talked about this before, but this also applies here to this type of phenomenon. And the question was number 703, and it asked, the question was asked, why has God given the instinct of self-preservation to all living creatures? And if you think about it, organisms, plants, animals, bacteria, they're all always trying to survive. I mean, they almost never go backwards, as far as evolution goes. They're always trying to improve themselves. They're always trying to move forward. They're always trying to cooperate with each other and make themselves better. So when you think about that, why would anything change when we pass away, right? Life would just continue on, right? And the answer that was given was that God has given them the desire to live, to carry out the designs of providence. Furthermore, life is necessary for the improvement of beings. All living beings feel it instinctively without understanding it. So when we disincarnate and when we pass over to the other side, that isn't the end for us. And I mean, most of us here are spiritists, and we already believe in this. But this helps people who don't really fully understand this type of phenomenon, and also who believe in reincarnation. This kind of gives an explanation for it. Life doesn't end when we pass away. When you pass away, you're still working on things. You're still working on yourself. You're still learning new things. You're still learning new lessons, and you continue that process of improvement continually as you live your life, and then you continue it when you reincarnate as well. So that is the end of my talk. I had a lot more, but I didn't bring it with me. So does anybody have any questions about anything about reincarnation or transcommunication or anything like that? Anybody have any cool stories?
It'd be good if we could find one on YouTube and transfer to the two.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'll just close with this. I mean, this is something that I find really interesting, and I know that a lot of other people find interesting too. I think that a lot of this type of phenomenon, people are kind of shy away from it, because I think that when we talk about these types of things, it kind of spills over into religion. And I think people are just so jaded by, religion and just Catholicism and organized religion in general. We have this image of God and religion that, he's this old man with a beard, sitting in a chair in the sky, and, he created you, but he also made this place called hell, and if you misbehave, he's going to put you there. It's, we have these ideas of religion and that really aren't really representative of what actually happens. And when people start talking about ghosts and they start talking about spirits, I kind of have this theory that maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, they feel that if they open the door to accept these types of phenomenon, then they have to accept everything that comes with religion as well. And they're not ready to accept that.
Also what they see in movies, whenever they start playing with it, what happens, what is portrayed in the movie.
Oh yeah, it's usually
Haunted,
right.
bad things are starting to happen.
Yeah. One of our guests here, he said that a lot of what builds up what we believe is in movies, and it's true. The movie that I mentioned earlier, White Noise, was exactly that same thing. The guy was trying to communicate through transcommunication to try to communicate with his wife, and what ended up happening is he started being haunted by these demons. So
And we have The Shack, which was a great movie.
which one?
The Shack.
The Shack. I don't know that one.
Never?
No, haven't seen The Shack. Yep. So
It's good that we're in the Spiritist Center because it explains what a demon
Yeah, it
is.
explained all the passing of.
yeah, and another thing with popular culture is they popularize these things and they kind of make it into like a joke, and they make it into like this this over the top haunting and demons chasing you, and people that's not necessarily realistic. I mean maybe in some cases, but people see that, they don't believe it, and they just disregard all of the phenomenon in general, and they don't want to put any kind of thought to it. But definitely there's something there. There is evidence for it, and that's all I have for tonight. Thank you.